As we turn our attention to the Word of God this morning, we will be in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11, and we will be beginning in verse 23 as we continue a series through Hebrews 11. We have walked this far by faith. Today's message I have titled, Faith in Tumultuous Times. Faith in tumultuous times, beginning in verse 23 of Hebrews 11, says that by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Verse 27. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that he destroyed the firstborn so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. Brothers and sisters, the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our Lord endures forever. May he bless his word this morning. In every generation, there are parents and there are grandparents who look around the world and they see the type of world that their grandchildren or their children are going to have to be raised in, and they say this is a difficult time. We think perhaps of the Industrial Revolution, where the world experienced rapid change and growth and advancements as the world moved from agriculture to industrial, from farms to factories that brought in a great amount of modernization. And it also brought about a great moral decay as cities grew and societal classes formed. People worked long hours, oftentimes for little pay, in less than ideal conditions, which led to, sadly, exploitation and the breakdown of the family and community life. And of course, it brought in crime. And many looked around and they would say, this is a difficult time. Bringing it a little bit closer to home, I remember the dot-com era of the mid-90s and the early 2000s. And then, of course, who could forget Y2K? It's hard to believe that's almost been 25 years ago. But again, it was a time of rapid technological growth as the internet took off, which gave rise to online businesses, digital media, e-commerce, as people could share information instantly across the world. As the tech sector grew and new technologies were realized, profits obviously grew. Many companies were overvalued, though, as they promised profits with no business model, and it ultimately led to the collapse of numerous startups, thus being called the dot-com bubble. As the years rolled on, we've seen the loss of privacy. We've seen data breaches and identity thefts, a rise of cyber crimes, and a growing concern with automation and now artificial intelligence. Yet as our information swirls around in the cloud and there's an increased amount of screen time, we have also lost the face-to-face interactions, and there's a decline of social skills and real-life connections. And many look around and they say, for all of the advancements, for all of the things that were supposed to be easy and create more time to do things, ultimately it's crammed in more time to do things. And we look around and we say, this is a difficult time to enter and embark on. Today, of course, is no different. Many of us feel the weight of uncertainty, and we struggle as we try to navigate this life. We can literally trace the rise of the smartphone with all types of depression and so on and so forth. There are shifting and conflicting values, as there are those who call evil good and good evil, as people justify the wicked and condemn the righteous. There are economic pressures now with the rising cost of living, as it creates stress upon families as they juggle bills and as they attempt to spend time more with family, but we have to stretch $1. However, on the opposite side of the coin is where people post their best angle and their best life now photos to social media, which leads to feelings of inadequacy and feelings of comparison as that game continues. But you see, we don't need to view life and its events through the spectacles of this world. Instead, we need to put on our godly glasses or our Christ-like contacts so that we can view the world through a heavenly lens. We handle, you see, what seems to be a hopeless situation with a hope that is sure. And we handle everything that is seen with those things which are unseen. But you see, we're not alone this morning in dealing with tumultuous times. We're not alone in dealing with difficult times this morning. Our text this morning shows us that Moses entered into a difficult time. Born into an era of oppression and danger, Moses and his family faced daunting and difficult circumstances, but they did not let the circumstances that Moses entered into and that ultimately he grew up into to define them. Instead, through it all, they operated in faith. And we too can operate in faith in these tumultuous times as we look forward to the future and we trust God. And the first thing that we see this morning is a faith that is not afraid. It says in verse 23, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. This scene covers, there's ultimately 4 scenes, and this scene covers from birth until Moses was 4 years old. And to get a little background, the king of Egypt was fearful of the growing number of Jewish males. And of course, he was fearful because with the growing number of Jewish males, he was afraid that in due time that he would lose his power and that they would rise up and lead a coup to overthrow them. And so Exodus 1 says, "Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, Every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you're to keep alive." Now there are two choices that his parents could make. First, they could obey Pharaoh's commands and they could kill their baby. Or they could choose not to obey, and then they would run the risk of the king finding out and killing them for not doing what they said. And then you could bet that once he killed them, he would kill the baby. And now you would think that our text this morning would say that they hid him for 3 months because they were afraid. But it says they hid him because they were not afraid. And if they were not afraid, why didn't they parade little baby Moses around, and why didn't they show him off? Because after all, he was a beautiful child. Why didn't they let everyone dote on him? It's because they were not afraid of losing their lives to save their son. And when they make the decision to not go down to the Nile and drown him, instead they're going to hide him, they're risking their lives. The ultimate sacrifice, as there is no greater love than this. They were willing to lay down their life for their child. And as they choose to hide him, as they choose to look towards possible torture, and they look to death straight in the face, they said, "We will not cave, and we will not give in." They had their godly glasses on. They had the fact, and they chose to fear God instead of fear man. And with this choice, they were able to recognize that God makes everything beautiful in His time. And what a unique insert and what a unique phrase this morning, that they saw he was a beautiful child. Stephen sheds more light on this phrase when he says in Acts 7, "It was at this time that Moses was born, and he was lovely in the sight of God." It literally says he was lovely to God, and he was nurtured 3 months in his father's home. Calvin says that there's some mark of excellency imprinted upon the child which gave promises of something extraordinary. And we get a glimpse of this because in Hebrews 27 of chapter 11, it says, "By faith he left Egypt," this is Moses, "not fearing the wrath of the king. Instead, he is seeing him who is unseen." You see, Moses' parents were not afraid, and their faith was nurtured into Moses to the point that he had faith, and his faith became his own. And it could be said of both of them that they did not fear. Are you afraid today? Are you afraid? Are you paralyzed of not knowing what the future holds? In just a few short weeks, we will go and we will cast a vote for a candidate. And any time that we cast a vote, of course, we don't know what will transpire. We don't know who will be elected. For some, it creates a sense of anxiety. What will the future hold? Anytime that there is change, even in churches, the sheep get nervous. But some may look around and some may be paralyzed and some may say, I don't know what the future holds. We're living in difficult times. Folks, I don't know what will happen. Forget November. I don't know what will happen even after November, but I can stand here and say that I put my faith and my trust in God, who holds the future in His hands. Do you lay awake at night and wonder and say, man, oh man, this is a difficult time? Folks, we don't have to fear if we have faith. We don't have to fear if we understand that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We don't have to fear if we understand and we know that we are lovely in the sight of God. We don't have to fear when we know who holds tomorrow. We don't have to fear when we know that if we are in Christ, we are held in His hand. So we need to understand this morning that because of having faith in tumultuous times means not fearing, it also means that there may be times when we have to make a choice. And verses 24 through 26 speak of this when it says, by faith, when he had grown up, this is from age 40 to 80, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Now, Moses' decision here was a faith-driven decision. Many people could read this and could feel sad and feel sorry for Moses. Oh, poor Moses. He left all of that wealth and all of the riches and all of the fame and all of the power. I mean, he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter. I mean, he received the best education. He received most likely anything that he would want. He was, we would say that he was raised with a silver spoon in his mouth. But the beautiful thing about this is that in God's providence, for the record, when his mother and father, when they hit him and then they put him in the basket and they pushed him down, and then Pharaoh's daughter found him, this is a side note, you know who got to care for Moses? His mom. God worked it out to where his own family was a helper and helped raise Moses. But we may say, well, poor Moses, he left all of this. One preacher states it like this, and this is something that you got to kind of wrap your head around here a little bit. He said that he left the world's best for God's worst. He was ill-treated. It was considering the reproach and God's worst. But allow me to say that God's worst is so much sweeter and so much better than the riches and anything that this world can offer. You see, we're not to store up for ourselves earthly treasures. Why? Because they don't last. Folks, stuff wears out. It breaks. It gets old. Last night, for some reason, I had the inclination, because I haven't been eating as clean as I need to, I had the inclination that I was going to walk. Well, I haven't exercised in about 4 years. So I start trekking off down the road, which Bree texts, and she says, "Hey, are you exercising, or did Melissa kick you out?" And I said, "No, I'm exercising." She said, "Well, I'm over here eating." And so, I'm exercising. My legs are hurting. My calves are burning. My back's hurting. I don't even make it a mile. And that's it. I got to ease into this workout routine, okay? But our bodies wear out. Stuff wears out. It gets old. But we're not supposed to put our trust in the things of this world. By faith, you see, Moses looked for a reward that was bigger, better, brighter, and more beautiful than this world has to offer. And when we step out in faith, folks, when we make a choice, when we take a stand, we may endure ill treatment. We may endure reproach. We may get questioned. We may get made fun of. We may get scorned. But in the end, it will be worth it. Here in America, we've gotten accustomed to kind of being on easy street as far as our faith is concerned. And we can, especially down south, we can talk about our faith. We can talk about our belief in God. You bring Jesus into the mix, it may get a little bit more hairy, but about the worst thing that can happen is somebody makes fun of you. Or I remember one time I knocked on a door and I heard the deadbolt click. Well, whoop-de-doo. That was the worst thing that happened. But we may get made fun of, but in the end, it'll be worth it. Now, I don't know what will happen in the years to come, of course. But regardless, it'll be worth it. And regardless, we may need to take a stand boldly and proclaim, "Thus saith the Lord." So, we make a choice. Thirdly, a faith that endures in verse 27. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of God, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. Now, there are two options in considering this phrase, by faith he left Egypt, because he left Egypt twice. And some writers, some people think that it references the Exodus, but the Exodus happened after the Passover, which the writer is about to mention, and there would be no need to fear the wrath of the king, because actually Pharaoh told Moses, to go on and to get out quickly. The other option is that he left after killing the Egyptian. Because that's what he did, of course. He was there, and he saw his brother being abused, one of an Israelite, and he struck the Egyptian, and he killed him, and he tried to hide it, but of course, you know how it is. Somebody saw it, and he was, he kind of was afraid of that. See, his heart renunciation of the riches and spoils of Egypt was in fact an act of faith, but his feet moving away from Egypt was also an act of faith. And again, I jumped ahead of myself a little bit, but after Moses killed the Egyptian, it says this in Exodus, that Moses was afraid and thought, surely that thing is known. The author is not contradicting himself. The writer here of Hebrews is not contradicting the Exodus account. Instead, he is interpreting it. It was not fear that led him out of Egypt. It was faith. Yes, one act of impulse led to the burned bridges in Egypt, but he could have led a revolt right then and there, but it was not time for him to do so. It was not time for him to stand before Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go." His hour, you see, had not come. And he resolutely turned his back on Egypt until it was time for him to retrace his steps. And he left and he dwelt in an unknown land, in Midian, in the wilderness, a stranger in a strange land. By faith he left, you see, and by faith he was going to return. And it's during these times that he endured because he saw him who was unseen. He saw the one who could not be seen. And Moses had a vision of God that allowed him to retreat from Egypt, to retrace his steps back into Egypt, and to hold fast and to endure and to not let go. And by the way, this endurance that he had was not a natural gift, because by nature, Moses was a man of hesitancy. The endurance that he received came as a result of faith. Somebody says, "Well, I don't know what'll happen if my faith is challenged. I don't know what I will do." I remember in 99, the year I graduated, I believe it was 99. It could have been 2000, but I believe 99 is correct. But when Columbine happened, I remember Cassie Bernal. She was asked if she believed in Jesus, and she said yes. And she was shot in the head and killed. She was a martyr. She stood boldly. And we think of times like that, well, what would I do? What would I say? In those times, God will give us perhaps the boldness that we need to stand firm in our faith, no matter the cost. See, the way is hard that leads to life. And we should not be surprised, folks, when fiery trials come our way to test us. But we can take heart, because when difficulties and fiery trials come, the Bible reminds us, for momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. And this comes on the heels of Paul explaining all that he had endured, all that he had experienced for his faith. But he calls them momentary light afflictions. Folks, it may seem difficult. It may seem disorienting, but it is producing for us a great eternal reward far beyond what we can comprehend. The Bible, after all, reminds us that we are to be working out our salvation with fear and trembling. This is exactly what we see, though, as we move on in our text in verses 28 and 29. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. Now, the Passover occupied a great place of significance in the life of the Jewish mind, as it harkened back to the inaugural Passover, where an unblemished lamb would be sacrificed on the 14th day of the first month. And the Israelites would then take the blood of the lamb. There's a little bit more to it, but would take the blood of the lamb and they would sprinkle it on the doorpost and on the lintel of their houses. And the blood served as a sign for the Lord to pass over their homes when he killed the firstborn of Egypt during the final plague. Of course, with the central purpose being that they would know that God is the Lord. And somebody may say, well, my goodness, that's pretty harsh that the Lord is going to kill the firstborn. How mean? How could he do this? How could a loving God do this? Well, folks, he had given them, there were many, many plagues, and there were many, many opportunities for them to understand that God is the Lord and salvation is in him and him alone. But the blood was a sign, you see, for the Lord's people and a seal that the Lord was protecting them. He was delivering them because they were able to pass through the Red Sea as if they were on dry ground. And they looked back and they saw the Egyptian people, they saw the Egyptian army coming for them, and they remember what they had left, and they even complained, and they felt that it was better there. Why in the world did you lead us out here? But Moses said to the people, do not fear. There it is again. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptian whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. The Lord was fighting their battles. And this is exactly what happened. It happened as the mighty Egyptian army was swallowed up in the Red Sea. They were delivered from the hand of the Egyptians, and they were rescued by faith. As one old-time preacher said, he chose the imperishable, Moses did. He chose the imperishable, saw the invisible, and did the impossible. And folks, this is, in Hebrews 11, this is our story. We can have this type of faith in these tumultuous times in the days of our youth, and we can have this type of faith as the sun sets on our lives, because in these verses it spans roughly 80 years. And in this sense, you see, we've come full circle because Moses did not bring about the promises of God. He led them out of Egypt he led them out of bondage in Egypt. And yes, these were difficult and tumultuous times. Are we living in tumultuous times? Absolutely. But tumultuous times are nothing new. Frankly, tumultuous times have been happening since Genesis 3, and they're still happening. But by faith, we don't have to be afraid. We can choose to honor God with our choices. We can endure, understanding that we're His. And we can be delivered. See, Moses did not bring about the final and ultimate rest. That would come about and would take another beautiful child that was born in Bethlehem. And like Moses, he would be protected by his parents, who by faith, they did not fear the king's command either. And this baby boy would grow as an unblemished lamb, and he would shed his blood as the Passover lamb. Corinthians reminds us, for Christ, our Passover, also has been sacrificed. By faith, Moses.